What if one of Hollywood's most beloved power families was hiding a nightmare so dark it could never survive daylight? A private home, a trusted bond, a single night that allegedly shattered everything. This isn't gossip. This is a Hollywood breakdown that feels too real to ignore, and once you hear the full story, you won't look at legacy families the same way again. For decades, legendary filmmaker Robert Reiner built a public image rooted in warmth, intelligence, and family values, the kind of Hollywood figure people trusted without question. From award stages to late-night interviews, he represented stability in an industry famous for chaos. But behind that polished exterior, insiders now whisper about a slow-burning fracture that allegedly stretched across years, not weeks. According to dramatized accounts and public behavioral patterns often discussed in Hollywood circles, tensions inside powerful families rarely explode overnight. They simmer quietly, uncomfortably, and when they finally surface, the damage is never small. In this dramatized narrative, Robert's adult son, Nathan Reiner, is portrayed as a deeply troubled figure carrying unresolved resentment, addiction struggles, and emotional distance that never fully healed. Friends close to the family later described awkward gatherings, uneasy silences, and conversations that felt loaded with unspoken conflict. One moment, everything appeared normal; the next, the energy shifted. Hollywood is full of stories where fame masks dysfunction, and this dramatized breakdown leans into that uncomfortable truth. What made this situation especially chilling wasn't chaos, it was control. Allegedly calm conversations, controlled movements, no screaming neighbors, no obvious warning signs the outside world could latch onto. Just silence. And in Hollywood scandals, silence is often the loudest alarm. The deeper you go, the more the timeline begins to feel deliberate rather than accidental. And that's where this story takes a truly unsettling turn. In this dramatized breakdown, the pressure point tightens on a single evening that looked ordinary on the surface, but felt wrong the moment you rewind it frame by frame. Hollywood insiders often say the most dangerous nights aren't the loud ones, they're the quiet ones, wrapped in smiles, clinking glasses, and polite laughter. This was one of those nights. A familiar circle, industry faces, jokes flying, music humming in the background. To everyone watching from the outside, it was just another Hollywood gathering where powerful people unwind and pretend the world isn't watching. But beneath that polished surface, something cracked. Witnesses later described a moment when the energy shifted so sharply it felt like the air itself changed. A conversation turned tense. Voices dropped instead of rising. Body language stiffened. In real-life legal thrillers, those are the moments investigators obsess over, because tension that's controlled is often more dangerous than tension that explodes. In this dramatized narrative, Robert Reiner is portrayed as attempting to steady the situation, not retreating, not provoking, but holding the line with that familiar calm authority people had trusted for decades. To outsiders, it looked like a father trying to keep a private family issue from turning into a public mess. But to those paying close attention, it felt like containment, not resolution. And containment, in stories like this, never lasts. As the night progressed, subtle warning signs stacked up quietly. The pauses between sentences grew longer. The eye contact became heavier. Guests later said they couldn't explain it logically, but something about Nathan Reiner's demeanor made them uneasy, not frantic, not aggressive, just off. That's the kind of detail that haunts people later, because it's impossible to unsee once everything falls apart. When the family eventually left, there was no dramatic exit. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a controlled departure that almost felt rehearsed. And that's what makes this chapter so chilling. Because when parents choose privacy over confrontation, they're often trying to protect more than appearances, they're trying to protect hope. The hope that this time, behind closed doors, things can be fixed. The hope that one more conversation might finally land. But Hollywood history is littered with moments where that hope becomes the final miscalculation. What deepens the suspense in this dramatized account is what happened next, or rather, what didn't happen. Hours passed without public signs of distress. Phone calls were made that sounded normal, even optimistic. Conversations about future projects, creative plans, deadlines, laughter woven casually into words. To anyone overhearing, There was zero indication that anything was spiraling. And that contradiction is terrifying. Because in psychological and legal narratives alike, emotional disconnect often signals compartmentalization. The ability to separate looming danger from surface-level normalcy doesn't soothe suspicion, it amplifies it. It suggests layers. And layers mean intent, awareness, or at the very least, deep denial. Hollywood attorneys often describe this phase as the quiet corridor, the stretch of time where nothing seems wrong, but everything is already in motion. In dramatized reconstructions, the setting shifts next to the private space, the home. A place designed to be safe, predictable, familiar, no forced entry, no chaos visible from the outside. That detail alone transforms the story from shocking to unsettling. Because when there's no breach, no external threat, the narrative turns inward. Familiarity becomes the most dangerous factor. Every hallway known, every light switch memorized, every sound anticipated. In real investigations, silence like this is deafening. No neighbors disturbed, no alarms triggered, no frantic calls for help. That absence doesn't suggest peace, it suggests control. And control is the word that keeps echoing through this dramatized account like a drumbeat. Controlled movement, controlled timing, controlled behavior afterward. This isn't the messiness people expect from emotional collapse. It's the precision people fear. As the night bleeds into early morning, the timeline becomes the central obsession. Because time doesn't just tell investigators when something happened, it tells them how long it was allowed to continue. And in narratives like this, duration matters more than intensity. The longer something unfolds without interruption, the more deliberate it begins to appear. That's when this story stops feeling like a family argument gone wrong and starts feeling like a psychological thriller. And the most disturbing part? The world outside sleeps through it. Lights off, streets quiet, a neighborhood wrapped in stillness while something irreversible allegedly unfolds behind walls designed to keep the outside out. Then comes the aftermath, the phase that truly freezes the blood. In dramatized cases, behavior after an alleged incident becomes its own form of testimony. Calm movements, ordinary interactions, routine decisions. In this version of events, the absence of panic is the loudest clue. Hotel lobbies, gas stations, small transactions, casual eye contact, nothing that screams crisis. And that normalcy, placed against the weight of what's suspected to have occurred, creates a horrifying contrast. Because fear usually leaks, shock usually shows. But here, everything appears measured. And when actions don't match expectations, investigators don't dismiss it, they circle it. By the time attention shifts back toward the family home, the narrative has already darkened beyond repair. What was once a private disagreement has now allegedly crossed into territory that no amount of reputation, influence, or silence can contain. This is the point in the story where Hollywood glamour completely evaporates, replaced by procedure, evidence, and the slow grind of legal reality. And just when viewers think they've reached the bottom of the tension curve, the story tightens again because the next phase doesn't focus on what happened, but on how long it may have been planned, how many signs were missed, and whether anyone could have stopped it. And that question lingers, unresolved, pulling the audience straight into the next chapter without letting them breathe. This is where the dramatized narrative hardens into something colder, heavier, and far more unsettling, the moment when emotion gives way to law and speculation collides with procedure. In Hollywood legal thrillers, this is always the phase that changes everything. Once the machinery of the justice system begins to move, there's no rewinding the tape, no softening the edges. Every action, every pause, every word not spoken becomes evidence. In this dramatized account, investigators don't rush to conclusions, they dissect timelines with surgical patience. They retrace movements hour by hour, mapping routes, checking distances, studying behavior not just for what it shows, but for what it deliberately conceals. Because in cases involving powerful families, the question is never only what happened, it's how much was understood while it was happening. And that distinction is everything. As the story unfolds, the focus shifts sharply toward the legal framing. Prosecutors, in dramatized reconstructions like this, don't escalate charges unless they believe the pattern supports intent rather than impulse. This is where viewers start to feel the gravity sink in. We're no longer in the emotional fog of a family crisis, we're in the realm of statutory language, forensic interpretation, and courtroom calculus. 2 alleged victims. 1 continuous sequence. No interruption. No external threat. Those elements don't just raise eyebrows, they reshape the entire legal landscape. In narratives like this, repetition becomes the most damning factor. Because repetition implies choice. It implies opportunity to stop. And legally, that's where the story crosses from tragedy into something far more severe. Then comes the courtroom imagery, the moment that always hits hardest in Hollywood exposés. The first appearance. The silent room. The weight of eyes locked on a single figure. In dramatized legal breakdowns, this scene isn't about spectacle, it's about atmosphere. The tension is suffocating not because of shouting or chaos, but because of restraint. No statements, no visible emotion, just presence. And presence, when paired with silence, becomes its own kind of intimidation. Viewers instinctively search for clues, a twitch, a glance, a reaction to the charges being read aloud. But there's nothing, and that emptiness unsettles people far more than rage ever could. Because rage can be explained, detachment cannot. This is also where the defense strategy begins to whisper its intentions without ever saying a word. In dramatized Hollywood cases, the choice of attorney is never accidental, it's messaging. When a high-profile defense lawyer known for handling impossible cases steps in a frame, it signals escalation, not desperation, preparation. It tells prosecutors, judges, and the public that this will not be resolved quickly, quietly, or emotionally. It will be technical, aggressive, exhausting. Every piece of evidence will be challenged, every assumption questioned, every psychological interpretation dissected by competing experts. And that alone reframes how the audience perceives the accused, not as someone scrambling to survive, but as someone bracing for a prolonged war. What deepens the tension further is the silence surrounding the funding of that defense. In dramatized narratives, money becomes its own shadow character. Legal battles at this level cost staggering amounts. Expert witnesses, independent investigators, psychological evaluations, forensic reenactments, years of preparation before a jury ever hears a word. And when the accused has no visible means to sustain that kind of financial burn, speculation ignites like wildfire. Is the defense privately funded? Is it drawing from shared resources? Is legacy itself being leveraged to fight legacy? These questions don't need answers to create unease. The fact that they're unanswered is enough. Because silence around money often signals complications no one wants publicly examined. Meanwhile, the prosecution's posture remains icy and consistent. In dramatized portrayals, this is intentional. They don't grandstand. They don't overshare. They let the weight of the charges speak for itself. First-degree allegations, special circumstances, language that narrows outcomes to the most extreme possibilities allowed by law. This isn't about optics, it's about leverage. By framing the case at the highest possible level from the outset, prosecutors box the defense into a narrow corridor where every move carries enormous risk. And the audience feels that pressure instinctively. Because when legal options shrink, stakes explode. As proceedings continue, the courtroom transforms into a pressure chamber where time itself becomes an adversary. Delays aren't relief, they're strategy. Continuances aren't weakness, they're recalibration. Every postponed statement, every sealed document, every closed-door motion adds another layer of mystery. Viewers are left hanging, forced to sit with unanswered questions while tension compounds. And that's exactly how real-world legal sagas hook public attention. Not through revelations, but through restraint. The more that's withheld, the more people lean in. Then the narrative circles back to psychology, the most dangerous battlefield of all. Because once behavior, childhood, addiction, and family dynamics enter the legal record, nothing remains private. Old interviews resurface. Casual remarks take on ominous undertones. Statements once dismissed as emotional venting are now analyzed for subtext. In dramatized accounts, this is where perception fractures. Some see warning signs that were ignored. Others see hindsight bias turning pain into prophecy. And the courtroom becomes the arena where those interpretations clash, backed by experts with opposing conclusions. Was this deterioration inevitable, or was it preventable? And more importantly, who bears responsibility when years of struggle intersect with irreversible outcomes? By this stage, the story has fully transformed. It's no longer just about one family or one night. It's about systems legal, emotional, societal colliding under pressure. It's about how fame insulates until it doesn't, how resources delay consequences but don't erase them, and how silence, once used to protect, can ultimately destroy. As this dramatized legal thriller pushes forward, one thing becomes unmistakably clear: whatever the final verdict may be, no one walks away untouched. Not the accused, not the family, not the public watching from the outside. And as the courtroom doors close on this phase of the story, the tension doesn't resolve, it metastasizes, pulling us relentlessly toward the final unraveling that waits just ahead. This is the point in the dramatized narrative where everything circles back to the beginning, where the courtroom tension, the forensic timelines, and the public speculation all collapse into one unavoidable question: how did it get here? Because no Hollywood family implosion like this ever begins with a single night. It begins years earlier, quietly, invisibly, in moments no one thinks to document. In this fictionalized exposé, the story widens its lens and rewinds through decades of emotional fractures that were never loud enough to alarm outsiders, but persistent enough to erode stability from the inside. To the public, Robert Reiner is remembered as present, engaged, thoughtful, a father who showed up, who provided opportunity, who believed in guidance over punishment. And by most accounts within this dramatized universe, that image wasn't a lie. It just wasn't complete. Because love doesn't always land the way it's intended, and in families shaped by pressure, success, and expectation, emotional distance can grow even when no one means for it to exist. In this narrative, Nathan Rayner's childhood is portrayed not as abusive or neglected, but as quietly disconnected, surrounded by care, yet somehow untouched by it. Family dinners where conversations flowed around him, not through him. Celebrations where he smiled, but never felt fully seen. That kind of isolation doesn't scream, it whispers, and it lingers. As years pass, that whisper hardens into identity. And identity, once shaped by absence, seeks relief wherever it can find it. This is where substance use enters the story, not as rebellion, but as anesthetic. A way to mute the constant feeling of being out of sync with the world that was supposed to feel like home. In dramatized retellings, this phase is always heartbreaking because it's filled with near misses, moments when recovery almost sticks, when progress looks real, when the family dares to believe the worst is behind them. The family, in this version of events, doesn't abandon Nathan. They double down. Rehab programs, therapy, relocation, second chances that turn into third and fourth, phone calls that never stop, support that never fully withdraws. And yet, with each relapse, something else erodes: not love, but trust, not hope, but safety. Over time, concern quietly transforms into vigilance. Conversations shift from encouragement to monitoring, from belief to fear. And that transformation is crucial because it changes how every interaction is framed. A raised voice isn't just frustration anymore, it's a potential warning. An argument isn't just emotional, it's a risk assessment. In dramatized Hollywood breakdowns, this is the stage where families realize they're no longer trying to fix a problem. They're trying to contain it. There's a moment in this narrative where Robert attempts what many parents do when traditional help stops working: he extends purpose. Collaboration. Inclusion. He invites Nathan into his creative world, believing that meaning might stabilize what discipline and treatment couldn't. And for a brief, fragile window, it works. Structure returns. Identity sharpens. The chaos quiets. People close to the family breathe easier. But stability built on fragile ground never holds under pressure. Old habits resurface. Emotional distance returns. And the disappointment cuts deeper this time because it followed hope. In stories like this, that cycle is devastating, not because of failure, but because of exhaustion. The kind that drains everyone involved, leaving behind raw nerves and unspoken fear. By the time the narrative reaches that final argument, the one that later becomes infamous, it no longer feels sudden. It feels inevitable. Years of unsaid things crash into one another. Love collides with resentment. Fear collides with denial. And what makes this moment so powerful in dramatized form is that no one walks into it intending catastrophe. Everyone believes they're trying to prevent it. That's the cruel irony. The desire to keep things private. The belief that one more conversation might finally resolve what years couldn't. But privacy, when paired with volatility, becomes dangerous. And belief, when stretched too thin, becomes blindness. After everything unfolds, the silence from the remaining family members in this dramatized account is deafening and intentional. No interviews, no public narratives, just a brief statement anchored in grief and privacy. Because when tragedy reaches this scale, words stop helping. The legal system takes over. The public debates morality. The internet fractures into camps. But inside the family, there's only loss layered on top of loss. Loss of parents. Loss of a son as they once knew him. Loss of the future that was supposed to exist. And this is where the story hits hardest because there are no winners. No satisfying conclusions. No clean lines between victim and cause. As Hollywood watches from the outside, tributes pour in not just to a career, but to a presence. Colleagues remember stability, kindness, leadership, and those memories clash violently with the darkness of the narrative now attached to the name. That contrast is what makes stories like this impossible to shake, because it forces a confrontation with a truth people hate to accept that good people can be part of devastating outcomes without intending them. That love doesn't guarantee safety, and that unresolved pain doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. By the time this dramatized exposé reaches its final frame, the tension doesn't resolve, it lingers. The courtroom battle looms. Psychological questions remain unanswered. Responsibility blurs. And the audience is left sitting with discomfort rather than closure. Which is exactly why stories like this dominate Hollywood scandal commentary. Not because they offer answers, but because they expose the terrifying complexity behind family collapse. And as the screen metaphorically fades to black, one truth remains unavoidable: the most dangerous breakdowns aren't the ones driven by hatred, but the ones fueled by love stretched beyond its limits, finally snapping under the weight of everything it was never able to heal. This dramatized Hollywood exposé isn't just about scandal, it's about silence, legacy, and the terrifying cost of unresolved pain. Whether you see this story as a cautionary tale, a legal thriller, or a heartbreaking family collapse, one thing is clear: the truth is never as simple as headlines make it. So now I want to hear from you. Do you believe stories like this are driven by individual responsibility or by years of ignored warning signs? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep, cinematic breakdowns of Hollywood's darkest legal dramas, make sure you like, subscribe, and stay locked in, because the next story might be even bigger than this one.